Hello, this is an assessment for restoration of a Rönisch upright piano made between 1890 and 1897. And as you can see, it has a beautiful walnut cabinet, though faded in many places. You can see the lid here where it says Rönisch. The underside of the fall is very attractive walnut veneer, but it's faded. As we lift this down, you'll be able to see that it's faded on the top where it's been obviously kept closed, and so the inside is not faded and the outside has. Now these side panels here have been replaced. They would have had sconces on and there would have been marks, so they've replaced the panel there. The centre one has a beautiful inlay, so if it's repolished that's going to look very stunning indeed. Repolishing these side panels is going to be quite difficult to match, but I think with a bit of artistry, hopefully you can get the colour to look right. But the veneer on the piano generally is very high quality, so if it was repolished, it's going to look very stunning, I think, generally. But looking at the side of it, it has a slightly different veneer, as you can see. Walnut on the rest of the cabinet. I don't know about this, presumably. I'm not the wood expert, unfortunately. Not quite sure what that wood is. But the rest of it is typical of the age of the piano. 1890s piano, very often uprights were in walnut. The pedals, looking at the pedals, we can see that there's not been a huge amount of wear. You look at the right hand pedal and it doesn't look a lot different from the left hand one. There's a little slight mark on the edge. They're quite low, so it won't have worn too much at the edge anyway, which is encouraging because pedals are very high, they can wear. But I don't see any woodworm in the piano, which is also very encouraging. So we're very pleased to get this one into restore because it will restore beautifully. Another encouraging feature is that the Ivory Keys, I don't think any of them have come off. You can't see any extra lines in the middle. There's obviously lots of sticky notes, as we'll see in a minute. They're a bit yellowed again. That's because it's been kept closed, so they've yellowed a bit. We'll probably be able to whiten them a bit with buffing. Now the backcloth on the piano is torn, but not nowadays. Pianos don't have backcloth because with vacuum cleaners you don't need the backcloth, so dust doesn't really get in. So normally it just gets taken off and made good. Can be replaced though if that's desired. Now, as with a lot of high quality German pianos, it has two music stands. This one folds in and is higher than this is grand piano height. I've mentioned in other videos that that's an ideal height to me because it's better for posture and generally good for height for looking at the music. And book holders, they're very small book holders actually, but very effective. Here's an example of walnut veneer repolished. This is actually new veneer, it's been re-veneered, interesting enough. The client wanted it to be in walnut, so chose the walnut veneer, and this is the result. We polished with about 70 coats of polish, finishing off with an antique wax look so that it doesn't reflect too much, so you can see the grain on it. This is a bit unusual. This is kind of like a modern walnut, but it shows you the kind of colour I think that the Rönisch will look like when it's finished. There's the inside of the fall on this piano. Back to the Rönisch, another encouraging factor is there's no moth in any of the felts here at all, and in fact no moth on the bearing cloth either, or on any of the other felts on the piano, so that's good news. Of course, underneath the keys it is very dirty and dusty. I'm not quite sure what this is, whether there was some mice or something having a go at it. Now look inside the bottom, the pedals are very creaky. That's the half blow pedal and this is the sustain, and that's a bit noisy as well. Looking at the strings, by the way, these are what we call German eyes, and they're a bit of a nuisance if you want to take them off and put them back on again. There's one here that's been replaced with an English eye, which is much more useful actually, so that's a replacement string. Now the difference being, if you want to pull these off, you haven't got much room to pull it off. If you want to take this one off, obviously there's a big hole there which will lift off the pin much more easily. Here's a new Fourier upright which has English eyes, called English eyes in the trade, and the others are called German eyes. Now, as I thought, looking under the keys, the lead has oxidised quite a lot. You can see there. Hopefully the keys are not split at all. It's not gone that far, but very often when lead oxidises, it expands and splits the keys too. But I think we can probably just make those good rather than have to replace them. Now while we have the action out, we can see it's a Herman Hamburg action, and the dampers are long, which is encouraging. These are three dampers here. It's a high quality piano, Rönisch, very respected maker. These at the top end here, you only need two. Then they've got three down, then the springs get tighter as you go down as well. Well, obviously we're checking all of those. They seem in reasonable condition. Look at the end of the hammers, they are reasonably indented, but as we've seen by the pedals, there's not been a huge amount of wear on this piano, so we can retain the original hammers. With these top quality makers, you change the hammers if you're going to change them, then you may lose something because they're so well made, that some of these original hammers, and there's enough felt on the top one here to keep it, so that's encouraging. Now in this area you have a pressure bar normally, but this is unusual here, where the bass section also has a pressure bar, but as we're here it is holding them well in tune, so it's working fine. But normally on upright overstrungs you don't have pressure bar in the bass. Here's a modern Yamaha, for instance, and you can see we have pins here, not a pressure bar. Here's a Bechstein upright which has agraffs throughout. These are agraffs, which really is probably the best system, and right through the bass as well. Now the piano's very flat. There's A, and that should be 440, and we look on there, about 432. Sorry, it wasn't very focused. 423, sorry. So almost down to the A flat. And if the A flat's sticky, that's a B flat. You can see it's very, very flat. And that means probably not been tuned for a very long time indeed. And let's say 25, 30 years. And if we listen to the pitch, now that one's very out of tune, but generally not as out of tune as you'd expect. And as we were saying, the pressure bar seems to be doing its job, because although it's not been tuned for so long, it's very well in tune, well, reasonably well in tune. So Rönisch, as I say, very respected company. You change what they've done at your peril, and with that in mind, these bass strings are wonderful. Now the hammers are letting them down a bit, so working on the piano we're going to, and of course we're going to get it as perfect as we possibly can. The hammers are very sticky, as you can see, and if we look at the tapes, they're very, very, very worn, and some have been replaced already. And obviously replacing tapes, then we would do that, and at the same time graphite, lubricant, and so on. So a general reconditioning, but it's going to be a difficult decision to make whether we replace the strings when they're all there. If there are some broken strings, we're definitely going to replace them. And you might think, well, don't you improve it replacing strings? It's very, very difficult to recreate the type of sound that Rönisch was after. And with the best will in the world, it's very difficult not to lose the bass, which is obviously a shame. So the only alternative then would be to replace the tuning pins, because some of them are loose. Now most of them are tight, they're very small, and I'm sure they're original strings. And that one there, you see. And unfortunately the bottom row around here is loose. So this bottom row here is loose. You could just replace the ones that are loose now, but I think certainly, and if it gets into centrally heated environment, they'll start to go loose. So the alternatives would be replacing the tuning pins and keeping the strings, replacing the rest plank under here, which is certainly going to be a wonderful job to do. We've made videos about that, particularly the older Bechsteins, pre-1902 uprights tend to need that doing, and there's lots of them. We've done several of them. So replacing the rest plank is a possibility, but I doubt whether the rest plank's too bad on these, and I think replacing tuning pins would probably work, in which case you don't have to replace the strings. So if you can think with me for a second, do we replace the strings, replace and then replace the rest plank, replace the tuning pins? Obviously we do that. We've got to replace these, that's the main thing, they're getting loose. Or do we keep the strings, just replace the tuning pins? I'll have to think that one through, and on this assessment in the email I write that accompanies it, be trying to think of the options there and see which is the right thing to do. So a bit agonising that, because with a maker like Rönisch, who you respect greatly, then you don't really want to start undoing things that they've done and thought about so carefully, and thought about the scaling of their strings and the composition of them and so on. And right throughout, I mean, that one's out of tuba, and that one, you can have a great clarity of tone. Even the break point here, which is often very mixed in tone, is very, very good. And then in the break point here, well, it's not perfect, but for this size of piano, it's not too bad. And the bass is very fruity, right down to the bottom note. So they're excellent bass strings. And lastly, with regard to the hammers, are we going to improve them, replacing them with Arbel or Renner hammers? I think the answer is no, actually. That sounds good. The hammer sounds good. It needs voicing. It needs probably light refacing, possibly, but really treating with respect again, because it's such a well-made hammer. And even after all these years, it's tight. Obviously, if you want a modern bright sound, then particularly round here, you would replace all the hammers, because you're going to get a brighter, stronger sound. But I think this piano's a mellow sound suits the piano. Touch is wonderful, by the way. It has a what we call nowadays a Langer style action, the best style action. So much has been thought about on this piano, and oozes quality. Forgot to mention that the piano is supplied by Metzler. If you're in the trade, you'll know that many pianos have Metzler written on them, as that were for the name of the piano, and with a similar casework to this and similar styling. So it'd be interesting to know whether they styled them after the Rönisch. They're not such high quality pianos, unfortunately, but Metzler's clearly supplied this piano. So that's an assessment for restoration of a Rönisch upright piano, finely made piano, but very neglected, unfortunately. I forgot to mention as well, its regulation is terrible, so it needs a lot of work on the regulation and reconditioning or full restoration. Difficult questions to decide on this. I'll try and write some of the reasons for that underneath the video, because a maker like Rönisch, and the factory still exists today, by the way. I'm not sure how much of the original is now sort of kept, as it were, today, because the factory was behind the Iron Curtain for a while. It made in Leipzig. At least it is today in Leipzig. It was East Germany before. But a lot of potential, but not sustaining properly because the pedal's not working, and very many sticky notes. But you can hear the underlying potential. Around here is one of the first tests of a piano to see whether the tone is there underneath it all. And certainly is, and it's not patchy at all. And right through to the bass, where they play properly, has a rich sound. So very enthusiastic about restoring this piano, and hopefully we are able to do so, and we'll really look forward to it. Thank you very much for listening.